I'm a firm believer that every single school leader deserves a coach and a person who did the job effectively to help them either on site or through coaching and phone calls and Zoom meetings to talk about what those problems are. Number one, because you can't pour from an empty cup. And so the leadership capacity is super important at the school level. And two, because they're going to continue to do what they've always done, not because it's their fault and they're trying to run a mediocre shop. It's because that's what we know. And so if you want something different, we need to put ourselves first and say, let's work on me as somebody who's going to solve some of these problems. But the first step is time blocking. What do you intend to do with your time? Number one. And number two, what you intend to do is probably not what you're going to actually do. So that's where we teach reverse time blocking, to go in and say, this is what I intended to do, and this is what actually happened. And it turns out that if you do that and you reflect on your day and your week, your interruptions are based on the same things and the same people.
You are listening to the Global CTE Podcast with your host, Sylvester Chisholm.
Welcome, my friend, to another episode of the Global CTE Podcast. I am your host, Sylvester Chisholm. This is the place where we like to wrap a blanket of goodwill around our CTE community, and I interview the best, the brightest, the innovators, the movers, and the shakers. Today is no different. I have my good friend and thought leader, Dr. TJ Vari here. Now, let me tell you about Dr. TJ, all right? Now, he's the Senior Director of Product Strategy at Maya Learning, with the focus on post-secondary planning for students worldwide. Dr. Vari is a former deputy superintendent, middle school assistant principal and principal, as well as a high school English teacher. Dr. Vari is an award-winning educator, recognized speaker, and the co-founder of the Schoolhouse 302, which has a great podcast. Make sure you check that out too. This is a leadership development company with an international footprint. He's also the author of 6 books on education leadership. And this is the basis for speaking engagements, coaching, and leadership development institutes. We're in for a treat here today. Dr. TJ Vari, welcome to the podcast.
Oh man, I'm delighted. I can't wait to get into it, man.
I know, like we, just for our listeners, like we were having our pre-show just chat, and I'm like, man, we just have to press record because it's too many good gems you're already sharing and dropping here. So let's jump right into it. Excited to have you on with the work that you're doing literally worldwide, helping institutions, leading educators, helping them to perform better, to make that impact on students. So how do you get here, man? What's the origin story?
I tell people all the time, like I never really ever had to apply for a job since the time that I was 14. I did start working at 14, but my origin story in education was I was a restaurant manager, and I turned the corner in that industry as a turnaround manager. And I did that for a few years, turning around restaurants in a corporate environment. I realized I was teaching people. I have an English degree and an education bachelor degree. So my wife and I moved to the East Coast, and I started teaching in a CTE only high school district. So it was a career and technical education school district, vocational and technical pathways for students. And I spent a bunch of years there as an English teacher, department chair. And I just got into everything, right? And just worked my way up, met a superintendent of a neighboring district, became a assistant principal of a turnaround middle school under No Child Left Behind. I love to tell stories about that. And then just moved up, deputy superintendent. And then my leadership development company, I was doing a keynote conference, and I met the CEO of this tech company. And again, serendipitously, we were able to work on some things together for a little bit. And then I went to work full time for this company, and we do college and career exploration and planning for students worldwide. And I couldn't be happier.
And that's great. Now, I definitely want to jump into to Maya Learning and hear more about that. But you just said something. So you were an English teacher at an all CTE school. So I'm curious about that. Was that, were you teaching English in context of the CTE pathways, or like, How was there any integration with that? I'm curious.
Yeah, it was fantastic. A great curriculum, integrating students as best we could, integrating students' pathways into the English curriculum. So I was an English teacher, and kids would it's a comprehensive high school, Howard High School of Technology is where I did my most years. I was a department chair of one of their other schools, very large high school in Delaware. And my job was to teach English. There were core subjects, and then kids, for about 180 minutes out of their day, they spent time in their, career areas, their shop classes. And because I was an English teacher and the focus was on reading and writing, I did as much as I could to integrate the kids' passions and their career areas into their writing and reading assignments. It wasn't always, a perfect fit, but it worked well with a lot of the essays. And we had a really cool open, curriculum with a portfolio that students created, and it was a blast. And because I was a career person before that in the restaurant management, I was able to kind of talk about durable skills before people were talking about durable skills, right? Yeah. The soft skills that are necessary to be able to run businesses and be good employees.
Yeah, no, that's solid. I had to ask you that. We had a previous guest, Pat Brown, who's a CTE director out in Fort Zumwalt School District. And he's very thoughtful about what you just said. Like, how can we do English in context of welding? You know what I mean? Like the things that you may have to read, understanding the machinery, or, English in context of business practice, sending emails, and, all of those sorts of things. So I appreciate you sharing that. So now you're at Maya Learning. You did this keynote and you're there. Tell me a little bit about your role and what you're excited about right now with, as the Senior Director of Product Strategy.
Yeah, so in product strategy, I basically do some internal advising on what the product should look like for students and how educators will use that product, counselors, school leaders, the type of data they want to look at, the way that students interface with the product, which I'll describe in a minute. Yeah. I also do some content for them because I spent 20 years as an educator, as a teacher, as a school leader. I write a lot of their blogs, not all, but a lot of the blogs that are on the site at maialearning.com. That's MAIA learning.com. So you can get blog posts there. I also run a podcast for them. It's pretty new. It's called College and Career Readiness Radio, and we're going to have you on the show. So that's going to be fun. And I advise school leaders on all of the things that the platform does: career exploration from kindergarten through 12th grade, college planning and college applications, including direct admissions and applying through Parchment, Slate, Common App. They're all integrated. How students can have a better understanding of the careers in their area and what their passions are, taking assessments and looking at data about yourself to make some decisions for your future. Work-based learning and tracking the work-based learning hours, providing industry opportunities for students linked to a pathway, 4-year high school planning, and making sure students have a full 4-year plan by the time they're in 8th grade and early in their 9th grade. And then developing digital portfolios and writing essays and keeping journals and making sure that students are starting to think about themselves and putting micro credentials and having this, kind of LinkedIn type profile. And in Maya Learning, the colleges and universities can actually see that digital profile of students, publish it, and do reverse admissions, which is fascinating. And I wish that every kid had access to it. Really, I've used all kinds of platforms and plugins. Last 10 years, I spent doing pathway work in a comprehensive school district. And this thing does it all. And it's beautiful. And like I said before, I couldn't be happier with the company and the direction of it, but also what it does for students and my passion with working with students worldwide. In fact, I just worked with a school district recently, And the work-based learning coordinator said, "Can I just bring some kids on and you can show them some stuff in the platform?" And it was awesome because we were on with young people and showing them how to act their work-based learning.
What was that in the States? This call that you're sharing? Like
that was in the States, but the platform's in 72 countries and 50.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to get to, because I was curious. I'm like, what does that look like from can you share any insights? I'm curious, what's work-based learning look like in any of the other countries that use the Maya Learning platform?
Yeah, I mean, work-based learning is pretty universal in that whether or not you're doing it in the school or there's like some type of externship, right? People call it all kind of stuff: apprenticeships, externships, service learning, and we can track it in any way you want. Okay. But the point is getting students to do time outside of the classroom. And some of that can be on campus. You can be your own industry partner if there's things that students can do on campus for service and work-based learning. And, the other part is getting industry partners and getting students out into a field of study. And even if it's not something they're going to do in college or a career or forever for the rest of their life, they're learning the soft skills, we call them. Like I said before, I call them durable skills. They're learning skills that they need for life that, frankly, and I'm a little disruptive in this space, but you just can't learn it in a box in a school. And so that's on the job training, if you will, but it looks like that worldwide. And I like to say it could be any flavor of having people come in and teach kids stuff about their job, all the way to a continuum of where like typically 11th and 12th graders are spending some of their school day on site in an industry where they're learning skills that they can translate for the rest of their lives.
Mm. I love how you said it doesn't necessarily, the work-based learning experience doesn't necessarily have to be connected to the career they believe they're going to go into, because of all of the communication skills, collaboration, teamwork, critical thinking, all those durable skills that are also being attained and activated really in those work environments, that it is kind of challenging to learn that stuff just in the box of the classroom. You
can teach kids what it is, but they're not necessarily going to use it. And I think work-based learning, I would say work-based learning spans a continuum from kids. The first part is kids exploring what jobs are available. And again, that's something that Maya Learning offers. This exploration of what jobs are available is really important, I think, especially for the future of our workforce, because lots of kids, especially underrepresented and marginalized students, don't know what jobs are available. And I said that out loud to a family member this past week, and he said, "Nobody knows what jobs are available, dude. Like it's impossible to know what type of jobs are available, or even like what an architect really does, unless you have some tools and maybe some architects to talk to." And there's a lot of jobs adjacent to architecture, for example, that kids might be interested in. And so a very first step for sure is getting kids to explore the types of jobs that are available and understanding more about themselves from a social and emotional standpoint, so that they know what their fit and purpose is and how they might make a contribution in their future. And I could talk about that for an hour, Sylvester, because it's just so important. And I don't see it happening enough in schools. Mm-hmm. The good news is that we're going to come to a tipping point, and all schools are going to be doing this. Any thoughts? Let's stay here. Any thoughts, strategies on how we can do a better job? And for sure. I mean, for one, providing students with a platform and a tool to start exploring jobs. I even see that My Learning has games for K-5 students, like specific to kindergartners and first grades, to play games to explore the kinds of jobs that are available. So I think strategically building that into a curriculum. I would go as far as saying one of the most important spaces I talk a lot about instructional leadership, but one of the most important conversations about instructional leadership that doesn't happen often because we don't intuitively think of it this way is the student schedule. So we're seeing these advisory periods pop up. We're seeing a lot more career and technical education courses pop up, as you know, and those are great spaces to build in curriculum for kids to start to explore their career interests and what type of certifications and degrees they're going to need to do those jobs.
I'll tell you, you mentioned it, and I'm seeing some of my friends across the country on the more innovative side with their approach to CTE, moving it back to not just starting at high school, but middle school and even going into elementary. I know you have some thoughts around like, how can we implement CTE starting in elementary schools or some of the benefits around it?
Yeah, for certain. I mean, if you think about privileged kids and understanding what types of jobs are available, kids who have an economic advantage also know people who do kind of other nuanced jobs, not just a nurse, but maybe an anesthesiologist, right? So they're aware of that from a much younger age. So I'm passionate about kids, like they're reading those in picture books by the time they're 5 and 6. I'm passionate about that CTE conversation being in kindergarten, first grade. We see it pop up more now in middle schools, which is good, 6 through 8. I think that's a great step in the right direction. But we also know that kids get disenfranchised with school far earlier than middle school. I was talking to some school leaders recently about this, and they were saying we lose kids in middle school. And I challenged them to say, no, it's visible that we lose kids in middle school. We really lose them in like 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade. Their behaviors don't show up until they have this crazy schedule with 7 periods versus one teacher who love on them and keep them under control. So that purpose, understanding yourself, understanding career exploration, I think it needs to be pushed down in the middle school. Unfortunately, policy, and as you know, things like Perkins funding and 509 seat time that generates those funds to do those things doesn't typically show up in most states until the middle school. So I think policymakers and departments of education are going to have to get involved in this conversation. But even without that, we've got to find ways to build in time, space, knowledge, professional learning for teachers to do this work as early as possible.
Yeah, I'm a firm believer in that. I think about 2 things. One, my 2-year-old and like exposing him to different books. And I'm like super curious about the books. And I'm like, oh, they're showcasing careers in the book. And so it's like there is some early sprinkles of career exploration, in the toddler books. But I also think about my best friend. We both went to school to be doctors. He continued on the pathway. So I have a degree in biology and so does he. But he's a radiologist, right, at the University of Vanderbilt. But I find it so interesting that he didn't just make that decision to be a radiologist. Like he didn't really even find out about the radiology pathway until like late in med school. And it's like, even from that standpoint, it's like, what if you were able to find that out 8th grade, 7th grade, or we both have the conversation, even he's also African-American. We both have this conversation. Like, what if you and I met you, Dr. Allen, the radiologist? What if we met you in middle school? Like, how would that have transformed our decision-making, our level of focus and intentionality about pursuing the medical pathway? So I think you're really spot on when you talk about like economic upward mobility, the opportunities, it's not equal if in terms of maybe under-resourced populations having that early career exposure to different pathways of success. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, listen, that's why work-based learning is so powerful. Yeah. I'm a big proponent. I did a lot of work in the space of transforming the teacher workforce, teacher retention. I have a book called Retention for a Change. It's about motivating, inspiring, and energizing the culture to keep teachers in the profession and to develop a learning culture for teachers and diversifying the teacher workforce. one of the reasons we should diversify the teacher workforce, there's a lot of reasons why we should, but one is so that kids can see themselves in their teachers. That's not going to happen overnight. But you know what can happen overnight?
What's
they
that?
can see themselves in a professional who we bring in as a guest speaker. So your friend, I think you said Dr. Allen, African-American radiologist. Now I get to see myself in someone who's in the school, who's teaching me, right? So they might not be a teacher, but they're teaching me, and they're teaching me about radiology. That's going to transform the world. And we can do that right away. We just have to find a local African-American radiologist, bring them in, and they're there. And guess what? Lots of them want to talk to kids.
I know. That's, you know what? This is fun. I did not mean to bring up my best friend on this pod, but it's so timely in this way, because he and I have those conversations about, like, how do you get in front of more children earlier? Like, and it's for all career pathways, so that, because I'm a firm believer, it's like, yes, these are the jobs of the future, or these are the jobs of today. These, this pays this pays that. But I think we have to start with a student needs to see themselves in the work, right? Like, I'm interested in this subject or these subject matters, and then here are the different career pathways that you should explore. Like, I feel like it's that understanding self first, and then, like you're saying, oh, I see myself in this career pathway. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's assessments, Myers-Briggs and others. I mean, we have 5 or 6 built into the platform that kids can understand more about their interests, their skills, the things that they might be good at, their passions, their well-being. That's the stuff that is not, I mean, we're getting there, I think, in schools, we're getting there, but just learning English, science, social studies, and mathematics is not good enough for the world we live in right now. And so kids got to learn about themselves and their interests, and they got to know how those interests translate into work. And then they have to know what certifications and what degrees that they need to be able to do that work, and how much that's going to cost to get there, and then how much I'm going to make once I arrive. And it's critical. It's super important. It's possible now to do in schools. And so let's talk about it. And listen, you can give people my contact information after this show. I'll talk to anybody who wants to talk about this. I'll talk about it with them, and we'll find solutions together. And it works. By the way, it works. If you teach kids in elementary and middle school about pathways, and you build pathways in their high school experience, and they plan a 4-year high school schedule, and you have them develop industry partners that are connected to those pathways, these kids can actually do their work-based learning, build connections in the community, go to college to do something similar, 2- and 4-year institutions or a trade. Military is on the table too. Let's talk about that. And then find themselves back to the connection of their industry partner and having an opportunity within the economy. Schools can do that. What we end up focusing on a lot of the time is graduation rates, and not what I'm passionate about. You said in my bio is post-secondary planning. Every single kid needs a viable post-secondary plan. By viable, we mean we think it's going to work and they can do it. And by plan, we mean there's some success and strategy that can come at the end of this plan if they work it. And plans change. That's fine. But we just can't graduate kids and say, good luck.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't work that way, and we don't have to look very far to see that it doesn't. As you're talking innovation, I was checking out your podcast with the Schoolhouse 302, and you were talking to who's the gentleman? He was talking about innovative schools. I'm trying to find it here. I think it was your last episode that you just put out. Let me find it.
Ben Farrell.
Yes. Was it in New England? New England school?
Yeah, he's doing some interesting work in New England. He's done work worldwide as well. He's been in a bunch of different schools. That's a great show. Plug for the show, Focus Ed, spelled like focused with a capital E and D. Yeah. Those shows are all about 30 minutes. It's part of a program we run, and then we produce the podcast, and they're meant to help school leaders to lead better and grow faster. And so we ask questions like questions to Ben about, well, what's he doing with curriculum and what's he implementing in his school to be innovative. And he's got, one of the more innovative schools that he runs. And so it's really neat to learn from the things that he's doing.
Absolutely. And I brought that up because I'm like, we need more. As I was listening to the episode, I'm like, wow, we need more of this energy. Because in your conversation with them, it was like moving away from traditional models into more innovative or, Montessori models and that sort of thing. But it's like we need a little more sprinkle of that energy in our traditional school system, like you said, to push and prepare our students. And I know you do a lot of that with your company in terms of education and leadership. Talk to me a little bit about some of the insights that you try to share as it relates to developing leaders in education.
Well, the first thing I'll say is the definition of leadership is influence, the challenge of leadership is conflict, and the result of leadership is change. And if you want things to change, you're going to have to deal with the tension associated with that. And we have a natural tendency as humans to avoid conflict. And so if you're a leader, you've got to brace yourself and you've got to learn, because lots of our school leaders, by no fault of their own, they're a product of the system. And we have this conversation right now, especially in America, and I like it, which is about equity and about all kids and opportunities for every one of our learners, even our neurodiverse students, having the similar and same opportunities as kids who are privileged. And that's great, except the system wasn't built to do that. And so there's got to be some things in the system that we call it the educational industrial complex. We've got to break it a little bit for it to do what we want it to do from an equity and from an all student standpoint. That's why I like to work with school leaders worldwide. We do one-to-one coaching. We do group coaching and masterminds. We love doing one-day institutes where we fly into a local school district or educational service center, and we'll do an institute where we train leaders on how to do everything from feedback, culture. Those two things are kind of what we're expert in. But we have leaders who reach out to us and want a coach, a personal coach. So we coach. We can do coaching calls just like this on Zoom. And we help leaders to understand how to get to the important part of the work and the change part versus the urgent part, which lots of school leaders simply fall under the umbrella of I'm doing urgent work all day and I can't get to the important part, which is instructional leadership, cultural changes, implementing the things that we've been talking about so far on the show, like work-based learning and pathways that don't fit. It's great. I love the conversation, but it doesn't fit. You got to break some stuff to fit it in. And so, we talk to school leaders a lot about, how to do those things. And again, we do keynotes. We love, coming in and inspiring people and giving them some tools. But our big thing at the Schoolhouse 302, Joe and I, is really to train leaders over time. And we're really seeing this push too, which is great, with service centers and associations and school districts where they're building 3-year contracts with us so that it's not just a one and done professional development for school leaders. It's layered.
Yeah, I'm seeing the same thing in our practice. I'm glad you mentioned that, like stretching it out, definitely not just a one and done, but moving from even a 12-month to a 36-month type of time frame, you really are able to see that transformation because things do take time to move in education and as someone grows with the challenges they're facing as a leader. Now, you brought it up, two things, time and focusing on just the daily work and not thinking about the long-term goals. Let me read this. This was from an article that you wrote in EdUtopia, 5 ways to support new school leaders. I want to talk about this, and we're going to get some gems from you on it. Let me find it. Here it is. Okay. This is a quote as it relates to new leaders, developing new leaders. It's very easy for inexperienced leaders to become consumed by the urgent fires that often overshadow the big the bigger picture, because many new leaders are just surviving the day. The high leverage work that yields student and staff success can get overlooked. I'm seeing that with new leaders in school systems, but I'm also seeing it with just folks that are maybe overworked, man. Give us something tactical to combat that.
Yeah, for sure. So this is true of new leaders, you're right. And it's also true at every level, from assistant principals to superintendents. And so first off, I'll just plug, we here in Delaware have an induction program, and my business partner and I, Joe Jones, and I run the induction program. So every new leader has to come through our program to be certified to continue working as an administrator in Delaware. So if you're a brand new leader, assistant principal, typically you have to come through our program, and it's based on PSEL standards. And so shout out to the Delaware Department of Education and our partner Wilmington University. We can grant doctoral credits through this program that we run. And it really does accelerate. We always say lead better, grow faster. It accelerates a leader in a school to be able to do things, again, that we're talking about. But yeah, so we get mired in the urgent. I think there's a conversation to be had in this space about vision. What's your vision for your school? What's your vision for your day? There's a conversation to be had about the fact that educators are very altruistic people. And so we want to help people. And so you get one minuted to death all day long by people who say, can I have a minute? Can I have a minute? Can I have a minute? And the school leader typically says, sure. And they say, I have an open door policy. And so their door is always open and they are always getting stopped in the hallway. So a couple tips and tactics. One, an open door policy should be on a timeline. Like, your open door is from when to when, because sometimes you have to close your door and do stuff. That's first tip. Second tip is, when somebody asks you if you can give them a minute and they tell you what they need some help with, you should always ask two questions. And first is, does this need to happen now? And am I the right person to do it? And the answer invariably for school leaders, assistant principals, and principals is no and no. Lots of people, they go to the top. This was something I learned in restaurant management. Anytime something goes wrong at the table, they say, I didn't see the manager. And it's not always the manager who can solve that problem, right? Like, typically there's somebody else who can solve that problem. And so we've got to build cultures in schools where principals and assistant principals have lots of other people, main office people, support people who can solve problems. And we need to train people that the principal's not the person you stop in the hallway, because where are they going? Typically, they get stopped where they're going to the most important spaces in our schools, which is the classroom. And so that's the last kind of thing I'll say about it is, we've got to get to a time when our school leaders are spending a good amount of time. I won't say all of their time, but a good amount of time in classrooms. And when we train school leaders on our models, including time blocking and reverse time blocking and the feedback structures that we train school leaders on, we teach them that your day is not going to be a 7-hour, 8-hour day as a school leader. It's typically longer than that, but you get that much time with students. So to be an instructional leader, you have to be in a classroom and you have to be there when the teachers are teaching, and that means the students are in that classroom too. PLCs are a good place as well to do instructional leadership. We can come back to that. But the point is, how can we build our day where 90 minutes to about 2.5 hours of that 7 hours? So we're not asking for a lot. It's built on instructional leadership. 5 hours to do the rest of the job. Okay. But we've got to be able to get school leaders to do instructional leadership for at least 2 hours a day. And it's possible. We do it all across. I don't care how big your school is. I don't care if it's rural, urban, doesn't matter. 300 kids to 3,000. We can figure it out.
Yeah. I like that. I really like the don't stop the principal in the hallway. That one, and those two questions, that definitely equips someone. And you can really see how a new leader is just coming in with a big heart. I want help. But it is like, let's put some rails around that help and some structure so that you can focus on that long-term vision. With that said, okay, for the person who heard you just say that, and they're like, sure, Dr. Vari, but you don't know my school. I'm overworked. I don't have time to focus on the long-term goals, or I don't even know when or where do I find the space carve out the space because it's so far gone at this point? What do you say to for someone who wants to begin that transformation?
First, I hear that a lot. I used to do these trainings when I was a turnaround principal. Like on the third year, the school's turned around and was well known in the state as one of the top middle schools. So they would bring people into my school. I love telling this story. Okay. They would bring people into my school and I would do like 2 hours with them, 3 hours sometimes in the school. And they would say that at the end, they'd say, I love all this instructional leadership stuff, teacher feedback, school culture. But man, the walkie-talkie just goes off all day. And at that time in my life, that was my favorite question because I would say, this is a walkie-talkie and it's on.
Yeah.
And I'm the principal of this school.
Yeah.
So nobody called me while we were here and everything's fine. It's better than fine. And so teacher leaders are important people. Support staff are important people. The capacity of the people who work in the school, department chairs, structures. But the first step is time blocking. Okay. What do you intend to do with your time? Number one. And number two, what you intend to do is probably not what you're going to actually do. So that's where we teach reverse time blocking, to go in and say, this is what I intended to do, and this is what actually happened. And it turns out that if you do that and you reflect on your day and your week, your interruptions are based on the same things and the same people. And so that's the place to solve the problem. And typically we don't know the problem because we're so mired in the urgent. We get to the end of the day. And guess what? That can feel good. I worked hard and I helped the people.
Yeah. It's funny. You just made me think about something. I just heard a story on Mark Andreessen talking about how Elon Musk works and with all the different companies. And it says like he'll, let's say, pick Tesla or SpaceX or whatever company, and he's there for a week at a time. And he's only there to work on the company's biggest problem. Like what is your current biggest problem right now, and I want to help solve it. And so it's like over the course of the year, you have all these big problems being solved. Like in some of the ways that you just said, he's going straight to the source of the problem, like who has the insights and information. I thought that was pretty profound. I'm curious your thoughts on, on moving in that way as a leader.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we wrote 7 mind shifts for school leaders for that exact reason. Is like solving a problem. If you've ever done a SWOT analysis, you know that your thinking at the end of the SWOT is different than what you thought about at the beginning of the SWOT. So the 7 mind shifts are all 7 models for thinking differently. But yeah, I mean, you and I, this is not, listen, leadership might be complex, but it's not complicated. Running a school is not complicated. There's stuff that works. Professional learning communities work.
Yeah.
But you got to do them right. And lots of people say they're going to a professional learning community right now, and really they're going to plan a field trip. That's not a PLC. And so the thing about doing what works is we know there's some things that are going to change the lives of our students. We've talked about some of them: implementing a different schedule, making sure all students have a 4-year academic plan. That stuff's hard. That's not easy, and it takes time. Making sure I'm in 4 to 6 classrooms a day, getting my teacher observations done, making, some tried and true principles of instruction, we call them at the schoolhouse, principles of instruction. There are strategies that work better in the classroom than others.
Yeah.
And so let's make sure teachers know what those are and how to use them. And there's just some simple things, but you're right. Spending time on that biggest problem. Yeah. And one of the biggest problems is us as leaders. I'm a firm believer that every single school leader deserves a coach and a person who did the job effectively to help them either on site or through coaching and phone calls and Zoom meetings to talk about what those problems are. Number one, because you can't pour from an empty cup. And so the leadership capacity is super important at the school level. And two, because they're going to continue to do what they've always done, not because it's their fault and they're trying to run a mediocre shop. It's because that's what we know. And so if you want something different, we need to put ourselves first and say, let's work on me as somebody who's going to solve some of these problems.
Yeah, that's powerful. Yeah, I got you. I got a lot of thoughts going through my head when you just said that, because that's even something I challenge myself with personally, is like the only one you're really competing with is yourself. And it's like, how can you show up as the best and highest version of yourself? And a lot of times what you're saying is so true, is you can't stay loyal to old ways that are no longer serving you. You know, like if it's not working anymore, just because this is how it's always been done, we have to change. We have to transition, you know. And I want to go back to something you said, because I know I caught a glimpse. I feel like you had some thoughts on that. The PLC. Give me a couple thoughts, best practices on what makes up a great professional learning community.
Yeah. So the first thing is, again, I want to go back to schedules. I know it's kind of mundane, but the schedule has to be set up in a way for teachers to collaborate with one another in spaces that are beyond their personal planning time. Again, hard. I'm not saying that's easy, but we've got to build schedules where teachers with common instructional responsibilities are put in rooms, not their personal planning time. They deserve that. If this is beyond that time that's dedicated to planning, to work with one another in a collaborative way. It's not field trip planning. It's about instruction. And we go back to DeFore's model and looking at data. What is it that we want kids to know? How are we going to help them to know it? What are we going to do when they do? What are we going to do when they don't? And so it's pretty simple. You know, I go back to things from the most simplistic standpoint, and then leaders being there to help train teachers and then help teachers. The point that you were making earlier, though, I just want to underscore the part about the capacity of the school leader. This is John Maxwell's work, The Law of the Lid. The capacity of the organization will never exceed the capacity of its leader. And it's so important because I work with leaders. One of the first things we do with leaders is to help them develop their own leadership development plan. And you know what's interesting about that? This is just, I think you'll find this fascinating. The first crack at a plan, a leadership development plan, the leader almost always comes back with a plan, even though we train them. So this is why the work is iterative. The first plan that they bring is almost always a plan on how they're going to help other people, what they're going to do to lead others. And we got to remind them, no, this is a leadership development plan for you. What are you going to do to develop your own leadership capacity? Because that's anybody listening, if you're a school leader, I don't care if you're a teacher or a principal, if you're a leader in a school, if you consider yourself a leader in a school, you have to develop you first. And we typically revert right away to, well, I'm going to do this for others and demonstrate my leadership capacity by doing this for others. I'm going to lead a faculty meeting. I'm going to do a professional development. Okay, fine. Chips in. But what are you going to do to get better at doing that? That's the question.
Hey, you're dropping so many. I had to write that down. Yeah, no, that was good. That's good. Yeah, I feel like people should rewind that part and listen to it twice, because, and you know what, that's like, that's just in context of leadership in all areas, you know, like it's not even just the school system. Like if you consider yourself a leader, you're leading a team, you're leading an organization, leading a family, you know, like you have to think about expanding your capacity as a leader. And that comes from all the stuff you were saying, like, you know, hiring an organization like yours to help with the coaching and that sort of thing, to develop yourself. Also, reading. I know that's a good part in terms of developing yourself as a leader. And you and I had a great convo earlier around books. I know you're a voracious reader like myself. What let me see. Top 3 books you want to share for education leaders outside of your 6.
Sure. Let's see here. One thing I would say I think you'll like, and I know this of you, is that we should read widely. Yeah. I think leaders, typically educational leaders, will read the book that they find at the conference and in the bookstore, which is great. My books are in those bookstores. Get those too. And we wrote books specifically for school leaders. But what we've done with all of our books is to take work that's either directly related or indirectly related from business and other strategies. So think about, I like John Maxwell. I think if you haven't read Top 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership, I like if you've read 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership, Developing the Leader Within You by John is fantastic. One of the things I like about John Maxwell is he was a pastor. He was a preacher. And he always said, like, you want to talk about influence? I got to get people to show up when they don't have to on a weekend and put money in the thing to keep it going. Now you're not paying people, they're paying you. And they're paying you for a service to help them get better, right? And so you've got to be at the top of your game and you've got to learn. And so I like that. I like his angle from that. And I use that angle to then talk about other business books. Radical Candor by Kimball Scott. That's on the top of the list for me. Creativity Inc. by Ed Catmull is at the top of the list for me. Those are cool. Like Creativity Inc.'s about Pixar and the merger. And he was friends with Steve Jobs. And I think he paints a really neat picture of Steve in that book that's different than I think some of the other pictures that people paint of Steve's work. And the Candor book is really important. We bake that into our Candid and Compassionate Feedback book because that's one of the first steps to being a great leader is to be clear. And that's super important. I would also say check out books on marketing, because what else is there to say about marketing except for its influence? It's getting people to change their habits, to do something, to spend their money in a way. That's not sales. It's influence. And so I like Seth Godin at the top of my list. There is going to be This Is Marketing. I'm reading This Is Strategy right now. And by the way, here's a reading tip. I just gave you more than 3, so I'll stop. Yeah. But here's a reading tip. When I read something like Revenge of the Tipping Point, which I just finished by Malcolm Gladwell, I'm also going to listen to every podcast that Malcolm is on currently talking about that book and every TV show that he goes on to talk about that book. And I'm probably going to hear him say the things in each of the chapters 4 or 5 times while I'm reading the book. And that's part of learning. And we could talk about neuroscience too for an hour if you want, but that's part of consuming information.
You know what? In a similar vein, I'll do the same thing as well, like to try to find the author interviews. But I'll stay with the book for a while and read it more than once. You know, like sometimes I'll read a book 3 or 4 times to get the principles from that book. And part of that is because I kind of challenged myself. I'm like, okay, now we need information and action, right? So for me, change is when we receive new and better information, then we should change. We should make a shift. So I'm like, okay, here's some great principles from this book. How do I implement? I don't need to read another book yet until I try to take some of this stuff here and move it into action. So I definitely like what you're saying, like trying to find more to really move it into the subconscious of your actions. I got a couple for you based on what you just said. So the Radical Candor Principles by Ray Dalio.
Yeah, love that book.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, Principles, Life and Work by Ray Dalio. It's a tombstone, but it is so good.
Yeah, it is. It's dense, but one of the big things that I love, that's a big part of how he ran his organization, was we have to have radical candor and like shoot it straight, whether you agree or you don't agree. Like we're going to put it on the table instead of like kind of just talking around something, but like let's get straight to it. And then you said, what was the book?
Creativity Inc., if I'm getting that
Creativity
right.
Inc. Okay. The Creative Act by Rick Rubin.
Oh, love it.
You read it? Okay. All right. Yeah, you're on it. I already know.
Love that book. That wonderful book. Yeah. Wonderful book.
I think that's for me, I haven't read this Creative Act. I'm going to add that one to my schedule to read. But yeah, that one, I'm sorry. the Rick Rubin book, Creative Act. That one, I think, is one of the best books on creativity and like getting out of your own way. And there is a lot of creativity that is probably there's not a lot of conversation about being creative in the educational space when there is a lot of creativity at play, but being open-minded to new ideas, trying new things, allowing for them to, maybe fall flat, but take the learning from it and iterate, and being creative in teams. I think that's a good one too.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. First off, we're talking about taking action from what we're reading. I love that. We're also talking about books that, Rick Rubin, mostly the creativity, but mostly in the music industry. Ray Dalio, Bridgewater and Associates. So we're talking about asset management, really, I think. Yeah. And then part about what you just said with creativity, I think this is really, look, I don't want this to blow anybody's mind, but like we talk about kids being creative and we want to instill creativity, but they typically are watching their teachers do what teachers have always done, and they're watching the teachers are watching the principal do what principals have always done. Yeah. And so I think that's where like taking risks in front of people, doing things that might not work in front of people, that's what's going to develop a culture where people are being creative on a regular basis, not us doing what we've always done and then telling kids we want you to be creative. No, the kids can see right through that. And then they realize I'm just playing this game where I'm trying to guess what the teacher's thinking. And the teachers are just playing this game to try and guess what the principal wants them to do. And so, yeah, we've got to change that. And we're on our way. And we're going to help people with this podcast.
100%. Yeah, I'm really enjoying this conversation we're having. Last question. I ask this to everyone. What is your vision for the future of career tech education?
So my vision, I'm going to say two things about career technical education. I love career technical education, but I think everything should be CTE. And I don't like that there's a CTE conversation over here and then there's a teaching kids conversation over there. And I just don't like that. I think we've got to understand that the skills that we're imparting on our students are career and technical education skills, that the career and technical education conversation needs to start earlier, and that all kids deserve some pathways. Now, I'll also say that I'm a liberal arts guy too. So you've got to get poetry and thinking and stuff that is not necessarily going to, directly relate to career and technical education. I believe that school has a responsibility to do that for people as well. Back to the conversation about creativity. But yeah, my vision would be that CTE is everything, right? Everything is, and maybe that means that we don't say CTE. Like I'm involved with a CTE and I'm going to CTE conferences. I love CTE, but that should be the central conversation, part of the conversation about educating young people. That's the first vision. And the second vision is very simple, that every single student graduates in every school system worldwide with a post-secondary plan, that they have a viable post-secondary plan that they can use after they walk across the stage, and that we monitor that, not just graduation rates and transcripts.
Like it. I like it. And I'm a believer in what you said. So I really believe everything CTE has some connection to it. And I find it interesting too, is like, which is part of the reason why I started this pod, is like to shine the bright light on how expansive CTE is, and not just putting it in this small box for people who aren't going to college or, maybe the troublemakers, but the rebranding of it, like, no, these are noble careers, whether it's welding, whether it's cybersecurity, whether it's coding, or whether it's being an electrician or plumber. It's all of those things, even the medical profession. It touches everything. But somehow there's still sometimes a stigma around it that it's not everything. And it touches English, math, reading, science. It's all of that, So thank you for sharing that insight, and definitely that having that viable post-secondary plan is super critical. Dr. Vari, you dropped so many gems today. I know someone's listening is thinking like, okay, we have to bring them in for a keynote or part of the coaching program. Tell us where they should go if they want to connect with you.
Yeah, so for coaching, keynotes, things like that, one-day institutes, any of our 6 books on school leadership, which are really directed towards anything from a teacher leader all the way through a superintendent. You can go to the schoolhouse302.com. That's the schoolhouse302.com. Go to the Book Us page. You can contact me there. It's pretty simple. It's contact@theschoolhouse302.com if you want to send an email. I invite people to find me on LinkedIn. I'm on Twitter as well. I still say Twitter. I know it's X, but LinkedIn I live on LinkedIn. I connect with people on LinkedIn all the time. And then also the College and Career Readiness Radio Show at MaiaLearning.com, MAIA Learning.com. Check out what we offer as a platform for college and career exploration and planning. It's fantastic and all kids deserve it. So hopefully you'll contact me in one of those areas, and I'd love to have a conversation with anybody who wants to talk about this work.
Absolutely. And you can find all the information in the show notes on how to connect with Dr. Vari and the work he's doing with coaching and with Maia Learning. If you enjoyed this episode, listen, do not be selfish. Share it with a friend or a colleague who needs to hear this. A lot of great information was shared today. And until the next episode, remember, you don't have to be great to get started, but you have to get started to be great. Peace.
Thank you for listening to the Global CTE Podcast. Be sure to like and subscribe to be the first to know about future episodes.